Okay, sorry that I came later. My clock went wrong in place in my office room and it told wrong time. I did not notice this failure. Sorry. Then it is 1 hour class, so I like passing on our progress. So we are now in the UNIDRO principles about this preamble, and we also need to consider some more points about the general provisions. Preamble, as you see in the printout delivered in last class, shows some of possibilities about utility of this document. As I've said, the nature of norm is rather a soft in and it is that very reason that the preamble guides the possible use of this norm. So, what are international contracts and what are a commercial contract? So, the principles could be governing law and regulate the contractual relationship on the condition of express choice by the parties. What are other uses? For example, the principles may be applied when the parties have not chosen any law to govern their contract. For example, they may establish some of a clause about choice of law by using the word a general law, commercial customs, and others. Then we have some possibility about the party's intent in construction to choose this document as a governing law, applicable law. So that is delicate in point whether we can definitely see the intent by employing the words general custom or general principles of civil law kind of word. Would not be clear over many instances. So that is judged on a case-by-case basis. What are these? For example, they may seem useful in the context of interpretation of international covenants. Of course, other context of many international laws on private contract could span. So, and the ambiguities or vacuum of specific rules may be found in other contexts of international law or private laws. Then the principles, as a matter of its nature, may be applicable to supplement the exact meaning of that ambiguous property or others. So you can see other points of utility as interpretive tools or guidance for a deficient, possibly deficient, private laws. And the deficiency could be usual since actually there are many diversity, many points of diversity in the international trade and the norms of international character. So often the drafters may leave some other specifics for general principle of law or a basic comprehension of human understanding, kind of or justice concept, for example, and a legal principles upheld through the civilized legal system. So the principles could fulfill that law and some function expected to respond to the kind of a predicament in interpretive context. So the principles as a means of interpreting and supplementing international uniform law instruments, as you will see in printout on page 5. Recently, both courts and arbitral tribunals have increasingly abandoned such a conflictual approach, seeking instead to interpret and supplement international uniform law by reference to autonomous and internationally uniform principles and criteria. This approach expresses sanction in the most recent conventions. UN Convention on Contract for the Sale of Goods. You see CISG as denomination, full form of a denomination of this, based on the assumption that the unilateral uniform law, even after its incorporation into various national legal systems, only formally becomes an integral part of the latter, whereas from a substantive point of view, it does not lose its original character of a special body of law, autonomously developed at international level and intended to be applied in a uniform manner throughout the world. So, up until now, such autonomous principles and criteria for the interpretation and supplementing of international uniform law instruments have had to be found in each single case by the judges and arbitrators themselves on the basis of a comparative survey of the solution adopted in the different national legal systems. So the principles could considerably facilitate the task in this respect. So we have the point about this contribution. And also the principles as a means of interpreting and supplementing a domestic law. So actually you can see this aspect in terms of a European contract law. And going further, the unilateral principles may offer a modality to draft a domestic civil code or others. Of course, we have a civilized form of civil code under the influence of a Swiss civil code or a German one. And the basic ideas enshrined in Korean commercial code or shared points most extent of the same essences and requirements of often upheld by civil law, so that is not the case for Korea, but new developing countries may find some paradigm or basic provisions that should be incorporated into domestic code. So it is a very influential source of reference in the legislative effort. Then what are possible uses of the principles? The list set out in the preamble of different ways in which the principles may be used is not exhaustive. Thus, the principles may also serve as a guide for drafting contracts. So I've said the international business transaction is actually very sophisticated and many factors, not exactly from a legal problems, so business points of consideration, for example. So it is actually compounding to shape one deals or business transactions. I would like to comment more about that aspect later in the class. However, the legal arrangement is fundamentally important since it disposes most definitely, beyond other factors, the destiny of a transactions and the character of a transactions and actual outcome of a business transactions. So, as even the business persons need to consider the ethics of the host country, for example. There are many varieties as different perceived the practice and social ethics. For example, you may raise a hand to signal some of a intention, but that would be received in other way in other host countries. For example, in Yugoslavia, nodding of head means rejection, which is very contrary to prevailing understanding of gesture. Nodding your head, it means different, quite opposite in comprehension. So many factors, so cultural risks, or and also the risks arising from differences of legal system and others. In any case, the legal assistance ensure to safeguard the business transactions, and in the strategic a response against unexpected a predicament or some force majeure event unanticipated originally. For example, the insurance in this text operates very helpfully, and other institutions involving intermediaries through the course of a transaction also one way to remove any potential risks, which could be detrimental, or in some cases foundational to avoid the transactions on this basis, and the interest would be overridden by that loss from the unconcerned neglect about the risks involved. So we often face with the different context of risks and failures, for example, involving international trade. So the model contract works to guide what the parties into some of the contractual arrangement. So they may add to serve the particular business interest or nature, or they may modify on the basis, the terms on the basis of a model contract. Principles also operate in a similar fashion, analogous to model contract. So they may refer to principles to reduce the agreement into some of a definite contractual form of document. In particular, the principles facilitate the identification of the issues to be addressed in the contract and provide a neutral legal issues, neutral legal terminology equally understandable by all parties involved. Such use of principles is enhanced by the fact they are available in a large number of languages. The principles may also be used as a substitute for domestic law, otherwise applicable. This is the case whenever it proves impossible or extremely difficult to establish the relevant rule of that particular domestic law with respect to a specific issue. It would entail disappropriate efforts and cost. The reasons for this generally lie in the special character of legal sources of domestic law in question and the cost of accessing them. Furthermore, the principle may be used as course material in universities. So, like me, in law schools, thereby promoting the teaching of contract law on a truly competitive basis. And one factor you need to consider is the practice, which is dominant in recent years, decades. So the linguistic problems or issues actually is one factor trouble the clarity of a contractual relationship in international context. So, of course, nowadays, the difficulty or risks involved in language aspect seem to be highly changed and diminished, and often we usually meet some of professional translators and many possible aids from experts on different languages and others. So the forms and enterprises nowadays have no serious difficulties in language, and they often practice to prepare the contract in pertinent languages. So, for example, in the trade between Nigeria or Saudi Arabia with the U.S. merchants of enterprises, then the draft contract would be prepared in two languages, Arab words and an English version. As you see in the last printout, that point was raised from the confusion of language. So the terms is contradictory among each other between two versions of a contract. So what is this positive? Whose version would prevail? In this case, the core soul in I see you can see we have several cases showing the typology of essences, often involved in international trade. The first case is what a Falcor versus Gruma decided in 1987 in Southern District of Texas. So the dispute of international trade is litigated in the context of a federal judiciary. So it is actually the forum to be debated, since it does not involve the state affairs, controversies which does not arise from the state context. So it is a foreign trade. So often the case was debated in courtroom of a federal court. And you can see the notable institution, what I call a Court of International Trade. It is a federal court dealing with the question of a public law about international transactions. So they are empowered to exercise an exclusive jurisdiction about anti-dumping issues or subsidies law, what a convention, and tariff controversy about its rate, or a confiscation of a products manufactured in pirates of trademark or patents or copyrights. So the underdeveloped countries, particularly those classed within a newly industrialized economies, with say NIAs in abbreviation, are often subject in frequency about the piracy claims and other infringement of intellectual property rights. So in that case, the authority of the United States may confiscate or prevent the entrance of that defaulted products into the domestic market of the United States. So embargo or other trade measures may be possible on the ground of statute. And that kind of dispute came to finally resolved by a Court of International Trade. And of course, it is playing on the level of district court, a federal district court. So the judgment given by CIT may be appealed to the Court of Appeals. And finally, maybe discussed in the Supreme Court, final authority. So the United States is a case law country, and the judgment law is actually in primacy. So many difficult trade issues are resolved by a court, and also case laws contributed to the understanding of international business people about the rules and principles sustained by the United States. Actually, the United States is a major trading country, so many are concerned about their laws. And the ultimate hierarchy, of course, stems from a constitution of the United States. And the system also shared between the Congress and executive executives. And the trade power is significantly delegated to the executive, since this is strategic and requires an instant response against a prejudice or a unreasonable or unlawful practices of foreign country against the trade interests of the United States. The strategy aspect may be plainly evidenced by USTR. It is directly reported present and sole authority to be responsible for. And the Department of Commerce also plays the statutory role to find anti-dumping claims, and also in cooperation with a ITC, International Trade Commission. So those three branches are most notable in disposing a trade controversies involving the United States, and their decision should be reviewed by CIT, and which is required also by international context, WTO or others. The member states of WTO should devise the institutions and system to ensure due process of laws and concepts. So it should it should provide an avenue to appeal the decision of administrative branch. That context was between the Court of International Trade and USTR or Department of Commerce. Often, Department of Commerce is a part name which appeared in the case brief. So you can see. And what? The printout delivered in last class exposes some of key problems in the typology. For example, what is scenario one? Sale of goods to Nigeria and Canada. It was offered in contrast. Imagine the two countries in the context of trade issues. What is this? And the scenario one exposes some of serious context of a corruption practices. And Nigeria more amenable to this failure, was very vulnerable to ensure against corruptive practice. What the corrupt practice have implications in the context of international trade. It seriously undermines the fair competition among traders. For example, bribery may vitiate the more competent suppliers, the cheap product and a high quality. But that distorts the expected dynamism of a free market. So it is a very sensitive issue in the context of international trade regime and also in the national government. So the United States has the act titled Anti-Corruption Act, and OECD also poured the effort to ensure from the evils of bribery. So they made several declarations about this point to remove the dominant problems, the problems which are dominant in many countries. It is recently seen to prevail, for example, in Iraqi situation. So the United States peace force to liberate the Iraqi and actually realized the regime change to remove dictators. And reconstruction scheme was launched, but some critics about a undesired operation of the U.S. Branches in Iraq. Nigeria is in country with Canada. The Canadian government is generally considered very civilized and its cultural identity often may be shared in common with the United States and other countries. So any exporting to such a country needs to be supported by a confirmed letter of credit from a reputable international bank. What is such a country in this case? Nigeria and other vulnerable states in view of a trade concerns. The confirmed letter of credit effectively plays to ensure against non-payment, the guaranteed in double context by two banks. The bank which issues the letter of credit, therefore, or the buyer, and confirm the letter of credit often issued by the bank of a seller. So this double guarantee would be a factor very facilitating the settlement of payment fee. Okay? The currency convertibility and repatriation problems could be overcome through a counter-trade transaction in goodwills are exchanged for each other, or an export transaction is linked to an import transaction. And it is imperative to fully investigate the foreign party, including credit and reference checks. So credit comes a matter, and many institutions to ensure against the fallacies and for the preventive measure against faltering into a business failures event. And in contrast, exporting to Nigeria, exporting Canada offers a lower level risk in terms of credit. So we have generally no fear about repatriation of incomes which grew from the investment. In some hard countries, for example, Russia and other underdeveloped countries, may have stern control about a foreign currency. So if the investors may earn the income in ruble, it is troublesome how to realize that income in any tangible fashion. They have some trouble as a matter of a domestic law of Russia to repatriate the income to their home country. And in some cases, even currency convertibility is restricted. And in that context, you need to know concept about hard currencies against soft ones. In the global context, the United States dollars and British pounds, euros of European Union and the yen of Japan are considered hard currencies, which mean a fossil convertibility in the context of a global transaction. So these currencies often have no problem about convertibility. That is not the case for a soft currency. So it is one factor the business person needs to consider. And also, in some cases, expropriation or nationalization of a invested assets or properties should be considered. And other factor involving currency risk, for example, is the aspect about a currency rate fluctuation. So the business people engaged in international trade need to be more focused about these risks and should not be dormant about this issue since it can reduce the income in a significant rate just from the currency rate fluctuation. So one way to avoid this risk is to use a hedging method. So, for example, a swap is one way to prevent from a currency rate fluctuations. It hedges against unexpected loss from a currency fluctuation. And in terms of nationalization or expropriation, we may see new efforts endeavored recently by Russian authorities. And they have a very fine statute to favor the foreign investment, which is unlike from the previous pattern of practices. So they instituted many civilized notions or concepts about condemnation of property and nationalization. And very interestingly, they spelled out the just compensation requirement, and particularly with the hard currencies. So they retreat from the external control of foreign currency in the case of nationalization or expropriation. And one other notable achievement charted in the context of the People's Republic of China is the revision of the Constitution, which was realized in 2004. In that Constitution, the property concept was equated between the state and a private citizen. So now the people of a Republic of China have been entitled to property right in many aspects as similar to the liberal states, or France, or United States. Of course, they're not strictly equivalent of the trade partners, but much improvement was can be said in well understanding of the situation. And scenario 2 exposes some of contrast between the People's Republic of China and France about licensing technology. Very interesting to see some of travels involving newly industrial economies, such as the Republic of China, often attributed as some culprit about a patent infringements or others. And you can see some of developed context of a computer hacking practice which is allegedly perpetrated by the Republic of China, and vice versa. It is interesting also that Chinese people often consider United States is also a attacking state in a society. How do you see? And piracy about the copyrights matters will be more frequent. And the preventive measure for the business people should be carefully devised. And France would not be the pillar in this context, but also requires to be careful about higher laws, EU regulations dealing with licensing of patents and intellectual property. So the hierarchy of norms comes into interplay. So what the scope of norms can be shaped in interplay or interaction. The scope overlaps, or it is distinguished from the concerned subject matter. If it overlaps, then EU regulation may lawfully invalidate the contradictory terms of a French domestic law. So the kind of approach should be employed to see the nature of problem. And you can see in the case titled Falco versus Kumuru, which concerns the subject matter jurisdiction and personal jurisdiction arising from the international contract, private contract. And this case also involves the issue about a sovereign immunity. Interesting. And also, delicate point may be raised in the context of a cultural differences and risks arising from that context. As you see in the case Kern versus a direction corporation. In this case, religious factor matters around the employment contract. The corporation operates for a Arab country, a Mecca Muslim, the kind of element about the host countries was expressed in this case. And the female person employed by this corporation was Christian, not a Muslim believer. So there's the point in controversy if she was dismissed from the employment contract. How do you see? But imposing and delicate for the person involved. But in this case, we see some serious business interests involving religion. The corporation operates a helicopter, assistance about a religious feast and the fair. So the employees who undertake that religious nature of a job responsibility should be Muslim, since the Muslim dictates to exclude other believers or a religious person from their place of a feast. So they could not carry their business responsibility if the employer is Christian. So she was dismissed. How do you assess this dismissal in terms of public laws and practices of international trade law? The district court decision is, of course, as you expect, for the favor of employers. In this case, you can learn the use of written employment contract to limit the employer's liabilities. So the contract is required to be prepared in express language about this aspect, so may be used as a ground for the decision matters. And you also see the extraterritorial application of a U.S. employment discrimination law. The United States has this code about discrimination involving employment context. So in this code, the employees without an impermissible practice based on sex, race, and religious belief, or this. And this is in nature and a domestic law of the United States, but it can be applied to the corporation placed in Saudi Arabia, Middle East state, and also Middle East Asian state, and also operate on that geographical basis. How do you assess this extraterritorial application? This point is also seriously contended by many international scholars. Is domestic law applied to foreign jurisdiction? There is a question. In this case, the district court so affirmatively about that application. And the bona fide occupational qualification. This concept dominantly applies in force to this case. And religion as a BPOQ in some international business situations. And in case titled Berina Distributors Incorporation versus Burning Sewing Machine Company shows the context of currency risks. In this case, the contractors employ the open price terms, but the production cost and other incidental charges increase significantly to deprive their basic understanding of contract. So critical risks against the